God says you got to let go of some things. There's one person that God was showing me in the month of January as I was reading through the book of Genesis. Somebody that God led on an incredibly great journey. Someone that God gave an incredibly awesome promise to. His name was Abram. You remember Abram? He eventually became Abraham. But before he became Abraham, he was Abram. And the Bible says in Genesis chapter 12 and verse number 1, remember, I'm not going to look. So I'm trying to remember. Yeah. It says that God called Abram to go to a land that he did not know. He said, pick up everything. I want you to leave the land. I want you to leave the people. I want you to leave your father's house. Everything that was familiar, everything that he was used to, God says you've got to leave all of that behind. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 12 that Abraham had to let go of the familiar and the usual. Everything that he had never known. He'd grown up in this. He knew this. This was his heritage. This was where he probably thought that he would marry and have children and have a job and retire and die. Everything in life that he knew happened back at home. Everything. And here God comes along and says, hey, come on. I want you to go to a land. He didn't tell him where he was going. I want you to go to a land that I'm going to show you. And do you know what Abram did? He packed everything up and the Bible says he left. You say, what's God trying to tell me? What's God trying to say to me? God's trying to say to you that as we're making this transition, as the kingdom is advancing and revival is prevalent, that there is some things that have become familiar and usual to you that you've got to let go of. There are some things that you've become accustomed to. There are people in your life that you have always gone to. There are places that you've always pulled from. There are things that it's become habitual. There are things, preconceived ideas. You thought God was going to do it this way, and this is how it was going to happen, and you've always believed that, and he did it for mom and dad, and he did it for my brother, and he's doing it for this one, so obviously God's going to do this. You need to let go of the familiar and the usual. You need to become like Ruth. Do you remember Ruth? Ruth was a Moabite, and here comes Naomi. Ruth, I've got to go back home. And Ruth, who had been a Moabite all of her life, said, let me tell you something, mother-in-law, that your people are going to be my people. Your God is going to be my God. Your land is going to be my land. Wherever you go, that's where I'm going to go. Come hell or high water, no matter what would take place, even though this is all I've ever known and this is all that I've ever grown up in, I'm leaving all of that behind. God is speaking to you today. That as we're making this journey, as we're making this transition, as you are making this journey, as you are making this transition, that you have got to let go of things that are familiar. You've got to let go of things that you have come accustomed to, things that seem to be usual, and that's just the way that it's always been done. Apparently, this revival dictates otherwise. This renewal God is sending dictates otherwise. Apparently, familiar and usual was not good enough. God is saying that you've got to make some changes. You've got to let some things go.